Good morning. Well, this morning I'm going to speak to a subject that is prompted primarily by some experience I had this past week that's relevant to, I guess, the time of year because at least the state of California, I think now and up here where we live in Northern California, a lot of young people in college and their grandparents and their parents, they're involved in graduations. And I haven't been really to a lot of graduations throughout my lifetime. Um, but this past week I went, it wasn't really a graduation, it was a award ceremony for all of the graduates from a certain school in this area in which we have a grandson that is doing quite well in those categories. But it was interesting and to me very sad at the same time because when things are happening in the education field, they're influencing children, and children are the beginning of the next generation of people. And it's the direction in which, for a lot of people, you can say, well, that's going to get them in trouble maybe about something, or you can say, I'm really glad to see that they're learning this, or they're learning that, or they're learning a profession, or they're doing well in school. And of course, obviously, if some people are doing well and getting accolades for it, or there's people there that don't get accolades for their lack of accomplishment, which is as it should be. I'm not wouldn't try to change that. But I got to thinking about this step that the group of people where I was, it was both men and boys, of course, young men and young women. And I was impressed with several things. It was a very, I would say, biracial group of people. A lot of different countries, there was some rewards given for people who learned foreign language as a second language with some level of proficiency. And it was amazing how many people of that group of young people had earned some kind of award because of their skill in learning a second language, uh, living in the United States, because that's not usually a big deal in most parts of the United States. But then I also noticed that a high percentage of people that got awards and got money in the form of scholarships and things like that that will facilitate them going on into higher education and pursuing a career. And in the eyes of most people, do something that's worthwhile. And I like to see young men with a goal of doing something worthwhile. And I like to think of that in the line that I believe is consistent with what the Bible teaches, that for a young man, he should aspire to grow up and develop physically and develop intellectually and develop educationally so that he can at least find a young lady and marry, and they can uh, my prayer would be, and of course my effort is to motivate them to bring up children in what's described in the Bible as the nurture and admonition of the Lord. But what I was impressed with was I don't have an accurate count, but it seemed to me like there was a whole lot more young ladies, and that today in our world, young women are being pushed to feel the need to achieve, primarily in competition with men, for the upper levels of corporate management and business and education and politics and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. so that they can be fulfilled more surely as they grow up to become adults. And they look back on their life, and maybe they and there are a significant number of women that aren't looking forward to getting married, particularly, aren't looking forward to raising children, particularly. The idea of being a homemaker is demeaned by many educated people in the world in which we live. And educators are in the business of convincing everybody that they educate that they really need the education in order to be successful. But the subject is fulfillment for a daughter. And because I believe that a high percentage of young women are being taught that if they really want to be fulfilled in life, and I've heard the term, I don't like it. It's, to me, it's totally crude, but I've heard young women being addressed by supposedly educated people into thinking it would be a terrible thing if they considered themselves, or somebody considered themselves them as women, to be a quote baby factory unquote. Well, that's as far as I'm concerned, as I've already said, it's crude, it's demeaning, it's repulsive. And any young woman who thinks that being a wife and a mother and a homemaker is an unfulfilling occupation for a young lady compared to being, let's just take the top place probably most people would think in the United States, would be the President of the United States. There have been a lot of people pushing that we need a woman president. We need a woman president. Why? Why? And why would someone think that if they devoted their life, let's say, to studying politics, learning how to get elected, deciding which party was the one that go for if you wanted to be elected the easiest and was the most popular party, and then you devote your life to becoming president of the United States as a woman president. Why would that be any more fulfilling or rewarding than being a wife, let's say, who brings 4 or 5 children into the world? Maybe it's just 2 or 3. Maybe it's just 1. But whatever somebody says, you see, I can remember back. One of the advantages of being an old man is I can remember back when I remember them beginning to push in school, when I was in school, to cause women to believe that fulfillment and satisfaction and success in life was found in the corporate world as you become the head of something or the boss of something, or nobody's telling you what to do, you're telling other people what to do for women. And so then and again, a caveat that always I try to include is that I'm looking at the subject from the standpoint of the Bible. Now, for at least 50% of the people in the world today, you just signed off in your mind. Maybe you're still listening, but you just signed off in your mind because you're not interested in the Bible. And it's an old book, and it's been around a long time, and times are changing, and people are different. But the fact of the matter is, the people aren't much different. And the fact of the matter is that people today want the same things that people have wanted throughout the history of mankind. And the sad thing is that some of them are being convinced that the design that God made and gave them as individual men and women, young men and women, if you're school age, that if you want fulfillment in life, you better figure out how to do the things that God designed you to be able to do that are the most fulfilling. And so I want us to think about the subject. We've got, let's say 18, 19, 17, 16-year old young people, male and female, and they didn't get here by accident, because the Bible says in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning God created. And then in the book of Genesis, starting with the first chapter and on, we read, and we will read some this morning, of what God designed in what we see populating the earth today. And there's not any unanimous agreement as to how long mankind has been on the earth. And if you track it and use the calendar as we see it in the Bible, you may come up with one number. And if you use anybody else's number, why, you're going to come up with a different number, and nobody's going to really agree in the final analysis. So it's kind of a moot point. But the fact is that nobody's ever been able to prove that any life on earth evolved from a lesser life of some kind. That the educated people of this world have signed up with the concept, for the most part, as I understand it, to believe that it's a fact that man came from a monkey or from a ball of slime in the water or someplace on something that they don't know how it got there, but and it's called the theory of evolution, but then they forget that it's just a theory of evolution. And some people will say, well, there's an account of how mankind came to be in the Bible, and then there's the theory of evolution. And I actually have in my head a quote from a book that I read when I first went to public school, about the fourth grade. And it said that the modern scientific man doesn't find it possible to accept the theory of creation as presented in the Bible as being true. Well, maybe you don't, and that's your problem, and I'm sorry about that. But it surely makes a whole lot more sense than the idea that without any planning, any super intelligence or anything else, it just all accidentally happened because somebody threw something against the wall enough time that it turned out to be the marvelous creation that we see on earth today, that actually couldn't have evolved from nothing to what it is accidentally some way. I mean, that takes either gullibility, or it takes an awful lot of faith, and it's not faith, but it takes an awful lot of faith to believe that all the intricacy and the interdevelopment, interdependency that we see in God, and the consistency and validity of God's laws that we discover in the field of science and space travel and war, for crying out loud. We've developed more ways to kill people than there is God knows how to come home. But the theory that it all happened by a big accident takes an awful lot of gullibility, or I believe a rejecting of the concept of God. So if I'm talking to a parent that trying to encourage his children to go a certain direction, or if I'm talking to young people that, as I do occasionally get to talk with them, that are thinking, what do I want to do for a career? How do I want to make a living? When do I want to get married? All of those things. I'm going to go back to the Bible and say, are there any clues as we read and study the Bible into the design and purpose that God says he intended for men and women to function together as they populate, and then later after the flood repopulate the earth? Is there anything that we have revealed to us in the Word of God that might indicate where I'm most likely to find fulfillment? And by fulfillment, I mean something that that you can look back and say, well, I had a good life. I had a lot of good times. There were some bad times. I made some good decisions. There were bad decisions. But I had a commitment to serve the Lord and to be honest and decent and straightforward and treat other people in a loving way. And I was, if you're a parent, I had children that grew up and did accept the Lord as their Savior and are committed to serving Him and pleasing Him and follow the pattern, you might say, that we have set forth in the Bible to keep mankind functioning on this earth. Because we all were designed. And it's interesting. Again, I'm really impressed with the technological ability of mankind to destroy himself, to design ways of destroying himself. I heard some news actually this morning, I guess it was, that about some captives that were taken in the Middle East, U.S. Marines that were captured and as I understand it, freed. And the armament and the transportation and the coordination and the ability to, if I got the numbers right, I think it was like 24 men were taken captive alive, and they were held as ransom for a significant amount of money. And within a very few minutes, really, as far as when you think of what they did, the United States military was able to marshal people from all around the area where they were imprisoned within literally a couple of hours and free the men, all 24 of them, without losing any soldiers, Marines, airmen, anything. And none of the soldiers that were captured being hurt, and killing over 60, I think was the number that I heard of the enemy. That's amazing. And travel all the distances they did, and something that they something that they had practiced, we were told in the report. And they considered someday this is going to happen, and what are we going to do to get our guys back? And they did. Okay, that's amazing. That's amazing. But those men were able to do that because they've learned the laws that are designed in the various things that were created by God that provided us with an environment like Earth and the atmosphere in which we live, that we can live and function and learn from observation and harness both to the good and to the damage of people. And to me, that's kind of an intelligent thing to do, is if I want to know what's going to enable me to have, say, when I'm starting out as let's say 15-year-old, 16-year-old, 16 years you get your driver's license, or used to when I was a kid. I think now you just get a chance to practice or something at 16, but anyway, and you can learn things, and you can make decisions in your life starting at before 16, really, but just take 16 for a number, and make decisions for your future that will enable you to look back 80 years later, or in my case, 86 years later, and say, I feel like my life was fairly well fulfilled. I'm pretty happy with it. I've done almost everything that I even dreamed of doing. I mean, and that's my testimony today. As far as I know, the only thing I ever dreamed of doing that I haven't done is sail around the world in my own boat. But I think I'm past the age when I'm going to do that. But life has been good in my commitment to want to serve the Lord. Has it been free of heartaches and pain and disappointments and sorrow and some of the things that have, some of the decisions that other people that I know and love have made? No, it's not. There's not that there's no sorrow, no disappointment, no disappointment. Not that there's no disappointment in myself. But if you have to live a perfect life in order feel fulfilled when you get old, you're not likely to make it because nobody's doing that. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back and look at what the Bible says, and I'm going to start out. There's some interesting instructions to children that are contrary to what is the attitude of many young people in the world today. It's found in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 1 that says, "Children, obey your parents in the Lord because you want to." No, don't say that. Children, obey your parents in the Lord because they always tell you to do the things that you want to do or that you think are smart or wise, or they're always telling you to do or not do the things that everybody that you run into in the world, they want you to do or not do the same things. No, that's not true. Because the first thing that happens to a person as they begin to mature is they find they have to make choices, and there is no way that they can make choices that will make everybody happy all the time. No way. But God says to children that it's in your best interest, and it honors God if you profess to be a child of God. It's in your best interest to obey your parents in the Lord because that obedience is what's right. Now, you may get older later on and you may look back and say, I don't think my parents made such a wise decision when they encouraged me to do this or that or the other. And you may be right that they were wrong. But it was still in your best interest, in most cases, to do what they encourage you to do. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. The second verse says, honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. And that to me, that phrase, the first commandment with promise, I understand that saying that for the nation Israel, that command was given with the instruction that it would enable them to live long on the earth, but more specifically, live long in the land that God had promised to Abraham through Isaac and Jacob and his descendants in perpetuity. And if Israel would have honored their father and the mother and brought up their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, and it would have lived that way, that is where they would be today, based on the promises made by God to the nation Israel. But they didn't do it. They didn't do it. And when we get over to the church age, and the Apostle Paul writing in the book of Ephesus toward the end of the transition from Judaism to Christianity, in the book that's covered in the 30-year period of the book of Acts, he restates it, you might say, but that it may be good for your health, and it'll keep you out of trouble, and it'll tend to extend your life. And if you're a wise young person, that's where you'll start. It doesn't mean that you won't ever do anything the same way your parents did it necessarily, but it'll mean at least as a child, before you come to maturity, you're going to be obedient and submissive to those who have authority in your life. And as you get older, translate that authority, you might say, hopefully, to God first, and the government that you live under second, and it'll be in your best interest. In Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4, we read, and you fathers, this is instruction to fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath. It doesn't say don't do anything that they're not just tickled to death about. That always tell them to do things that they want to do. Always make sure that they're happy about everything that they do, and always make sure that you told them what a wonderful person they were. But there are things that fathers can do if they're not consistent in things that they instruct their children to do and not do. If they don't follow through on commitments that they make to their children, to their wives, to other people in their life, there's things that fathers can do that will tend to frustrate or provoke children to wrath. And the Bible says, fathers, don't do that. But bring them up. In other words, it's the responsibility of fathers. And one of the problems that people have sometimes with this distinguishing between the roles of fathers and mothers is too many fathers too often decide that they're going to give all of the time, energy, and focus of their life into being successful in their career, whatever it is, or their hobbies, maybe instead. But let's go to the positive side, whatever their career is, to the point that they don't have a relationship with their children. And that provokes their children to anger. But in contrast to doing things that would provoke your children to frustration and anger, they're told to bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. And one of the things that I think we can do as we read and study the scripture is figure out what is it that we're told about the makeup and the job description, you might say, to use that industry terminology, the job description of a parent to help their daughters, in this case we're thinking about primarily, but both sons and daughters, help their children to live a fulfilling life that is profitable not only for this life on this earth at this time, but is also profitable for eternity. Godliness is profitable, not only for the life we're told that now is, but for that which is to come. And then in Colossians, the same Apostle Paul says in chapter 3 and verse 21, in the New King James translation, which is what I use most of the time, fathers, do not provoke your children, lest they become discouraged. And so when we have children, when they reach the age of, say, graduating from high school to college, and to a lesser degree from grade school to high school, then they're beginning to make decisions that should be consistent with God's design of males versus females, as far as making it more likely that at the end of your life you'll look back and say, I think my life was fulfilling. It was worthwhile. And you may look at your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, and that's maybe part of maybe the greatest bit of satisfaction, you might put it, in what you've accomplished. But again, we gotta decide, what does this look like in the world today? Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and that you may live long on the earth. What does that look like today in the United States of America, if that's where you live, or whatever country you live in, if it's not the United States of America. I sat in this gathering that I was in this past week. It was for graduates, but it was actually not really the graduation ceremony. It was an awards ceremony, pretty much. So this is for the people that had recognition beyond the normal grade average, included in some cases grade averages, but beyond the normal grade averages and outstandingly beyond in many cases. And of course, there were parents there, there were grandparents there, there were, of course, teachers and school administrators and photographers and representatives from other schools that gave out scholarships and things like that, universities and colleges, and a lot of talk. And in an award ceremony, there were gifts of money to be used to help get higher education, housing, etc., for the graduates who are continuing on into college and university studies. And my wife and I were there because we had a grandchild who was there and who was participating. And we were very thankful and grateful for his successes in his schooling and what we know of his commitments in life to this age in his life. For the most part, we are grateful for, thankful for. I shy away from using the word proud of. It's okay, and there's a place to be proud of things that your children have done through hard work and diligence, maybe particularly beyond the call of duty, so to speak. But on the other hand, it's so critical that we realize whatever talents, whatever abilities, whatever motivation, whatever training we received as children, that's something that somebody, God, parents, somebody extended themselves to help us to accomplish whatever those levels of achievement are. And I think it was it's obvious to me, at least today, that the push is to make young men feel like if they take the lead, if they take responsibility, if they make decisions that doesn't seem to be exalting females, women, that somehow there's something wrong with their standard of right and wrong. And that women should get advantages, they should get promotions, they should get tuition, they should get awards whenever they accomplish a reasonable level of skill in a given study. And I don't have any problem with, but to the point seeming to be that if they're just going to grow up and then become a homemaker, that's kind of mundane. I mean, who gets excited about that? Fortunately, there are a significant number of young women who look forward to being a wife and a mother and a homemaker. And when you look at what the Bible has to say about a wife, a mother, and a homemaker, and you try to contrast or compare that with what the father or the husband is doing, let's say as president of the United States, which is in God's eyes more important, to bring up children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, the next generation of population, or to be able to control the country? And I think any thinking person would realize it's more important that we bring up the next generation of children. In other words, manage the home, be a help meet to a husband, and that word help meet is a quote actually from the scriptures. A help meet to her husband, and a manager of the home, and almost any kind of education that's primarily reading, writing, and arithmetic would facilitate that. But to feel that in order to feel fulfilled at the end of my life, I need to become a CEO at a large automotive manufacturing company, or a large hospital, or a nursing facility, or I need to become the boss of something. No, that's not true. That may tend to more frustration than fulfillment that you achieve and push yourself to achieve in the ways that I feel like women are being encouraged to push themselves out of the home and into the workplace and compete with men for the most part for leadership roles. And and the problem partially is that at the same time women are being pushed to push harder to be ahead, guys are being pushed to lay back. And unfortunately, guys will tend to do that. It's happening. There's lots of young men that don't know whether they should take charge, whether they should try to lead, try to guide, try to take responsibility for a family. A lot of guys don't want to get married because we get things upside down in a world when all of success and satisfaction and value seems to be gauged by how much money we make, or how many people work for us, or how many $1 billion the corporation that we manages to turn over every year. So I think that it's a mistake for parents to encourage and allow educators without comment to push their daughters, let's say, to want to get out into the work world and excel, and yet discourage their sons from getting out in life and excel, because that's turning things upside down. It's turning things upside down. And actually, the reason, I believe, as I look at what we're going to look at in the Bible, I believe that the abilities that women were designed with by God to enable them to find fulfillment in being a helpmeet to their husband are what most in industry capitalize on with women to make them a helpmeet for making the corporation more money. They have those skills. That's the crazy thing, is that God designed women with skills, attitudes, and aptitudes, and things of that nature that men don't have. It's all right if the man functions where he's supposed to be. He doesn't need them to the degree that, let's say, his wife and the mother of his children and their children need to have. He doesn't need them. But if you take that woman out of the home environment and her relationship with her husband and put her to work for some big news broadcasting company, yeah, she'll do a great job. You put her in charge of the White House, I've kind of read up a little bit on the woman. That's not a young woman, she's an older woman, but she's experienced in that. And from all I see and read, she's extremely capable of handling the job that she's hired to do, working for the president in the White House. And it's interesting to me in looking at her own testimony that as she started out in life working for a president of the United States, and then got to a certain age where she was a wife and a mother and had children and had responsibilities. I understand she said to herself, you know what? This is too much. And I'm gonna get out of the work field until my kids grow up. And she did. And then her kids grew up and matured and went off to college and all that kind of thing. And she decided to go back to work. And in this case, in the president White House. Okay, to me, I, I don't know that that's the greatest woman for a woman to live her life, and I'm sure she works like a dog, and I'm sure there's times when she's really tired, uh, and and she, but she does a good job of what she does, and it's something she wanted to do, and as far as I know, was able to keep all the balls in the air, and so if that's the way she did, and that the choices she made, that's fine. But it isn't necessary to be in as the place of prominence that she is in as a woman to feel fulfilled in life at her age. I don't have a problem, and I hope she does feel fulfilled. But but I'm just saying that isn't the prerequisite or standard by which all young girls coming on and graduating from, say, high school and deciding whether to or whether not to go into college, university, that's not the criteria. And so it's it uh, it's an interesting thing to look at what we find in the scriptures, that if we take it and put it in our thought process as we're trying to, yeah, as a parent, in my case, grandparent, have any influence on any of on my grandkids or great grandkids now. I think there's 30 some of them. Um, it's interesting that there's information in the Bible from God relevant to the work that He expected Adam and Eve and their descendants down to today to be involved in, that would indicate how they're designed and what would more surely facilitate coming to a place of fulfillment at the end of a life. There's a lot in there, and I hope we can get some out of it. To me, graduation from high school is probably the first step, and you might say in adulthood for a child. I mean, I can go back to when I was at that point in my life. I can remember back a little bit, not probably as much as I could have, but my goal was not to continue on in school, and I didn't go past high school, and other than in some specific subjects for a specific reason. But as far as any degrees, nothing beyond high school. But I wanted to get a business started, and I wanted to buy equipment, and I had to find a location, and I'd saved some money already, and so and at that same time, I at least at a certain point, developed an interest in a young lady that we decided we'd like to get married, and we talked about marriage and life and raising children and bringing children up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. We talked about a lot of those things, and that's a pretty significantly insecure period of time for some people. It certainly was for me, at least in those years. But I have a lot of empathy for young people who are in that situation. But graduation is kind of the beginning of adulthood for many young men and women, and sometimes there's a lot of pressure being put on by parents, and other young people of comparable age uh, to go to school, to university or college, to go into debt to get a degree in something beyond high school, maybe to learn a profession, to learn trade, whatever. Uh, there's a lot of pressure put on parents of children that to make them feel that they should have enough money ahead that they can afford to pay for their children's university. But yet, one of the things that's happening in our country is that the cost of education has gone off the charts, and not very many parents have the money to just pay for some child's college uh, from their savings, let's say. They don't have it. Do they need to have it? Should they have it? Is it in the best interest of the child to have that debt and whatever they can earn with that additional earnings with the degree that they get? And of course, I think a lot of people grow up and pay the money for an education, get a degree in something that doesn't seem to make much money. They don't make enough money to pay for it about it. And I think today most children, with some exceptions, are being pressed to feeling like they got to get a college degree to be successful adults. Well, that's not true. That's not true. I know a lot of successful adults, and some of them are quite wealthy, that never went past high school. Now, am I saying that that's what you should do? I don't. That's you have to make that call. But but it's not the end of the world if you can't get a degree in some other and pay a lot of money or take on a lot of debt in order to get a degree. If you can work your way through, if you can do it without debt, if you can take the cost of the education and factor in what it's gonna what it really will change in the way you get the return on your investment, it might be worth doing. It might not in some cases. And I think it's important that if the goal is really to be fulfilled at the end of your life, then you better have some understanding of how you as a man were designed to function in life and how you as a woman were designed to function in life. And just because educators are trying to convince you that you got to have our little diploma with that says you're whatever it says you are, doesn't mean that you have to have that to be fulfilled in life. Because fulfillment in life it isn't simply how much money you make or don't make. It's interesting, in Genesis 18:19, it was said of Abraham, and in the last few weeks we've done a lot of talking about Abram, but it was said of Abram, whose name was changed to Abraham, and Sarai, whose name was changed to Sarah. God said in Genesis 18 to Abram, I have known, or about Abram actually, I have known him in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord, to do righteousness and justice, that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has spoken to him. In other words, God made a promise to Abraham, and God told Noah what was going to come as a result of him having innumerable children. So many, if you could count the stars in the sky or count the sand in the seashore, you could count your children. And And he put Abraham through and Abram, call it either way, through the test, you might say, because it got to the point that Sarah was past the age of having children. And it's interesting when you get to talking about a young lady. You know, if I pursue a career, I want to be fulfilled. I want to become president of the United States. Let's say. Okay, so she if she goes to school, graduates from high school, goes on into university, spends another 4 years, let's say, in university, and then she tries to work her way up through the political circles because she wants to be president of the United States. And let's suppose she makes it. Maybe she didn't marry so that she could have all the time, energy, and money she needed to devote to becoming president of the United States. She hadn't had any children because she was looking after all of the welfare of the United States through the government. And then she realizes that the clock has run out because you can only bear children for so many years if you're a woman, and then that stops. And is that all you wanted? In other words, the fact that you became president of the United States, was that enough to fulfill your life? And if you work that back down to whatever the person that you would consider the lowest on the rung in corporate America is, and that's where you were, would that be fulfillment? Or is there something in most every woman that really wants to be a mother, that really needs a relationship with a husband? Because she really was designed to be a helper to a husband. Now, a CEO or the political system, the Democratic Party or the Republican Party in our case, is about the only two parties that you could go there with. But you may say, well, I fought my way up all the way and I made it and I've been the president of the United States. And I'm very, very satisfied and very fulfilled. I got this voted in and that voted in and this voted out and that didn't vote it out, and we avoided this war and we won that war and we did this. And I'm very fulfilled. Now, a person might say that, but is that really true? Are they really inside their heart, inside their mind? Actually, it's not down here. Heart, the blood pump is, but the heart of your mind is up here. Are they really at peace? The people that you know that work the hardest, let's say the women you know that work the hardest and have climbed the corporate ladder the farthest, are they the sweetest people, the kindest people, the nicest people? Are they, for the most part? Do they seem to be really fulfilled? If you look at the satisfaction with job statistics, I did a little research yesterday, but it's so convoluted and divided up into so many sections. It's very difficult to get an answer to what I wanted. But basically, somewhere between 40 and 75% of people are unhappy with their career choices. Okay, and in women over men, roughly 10% more women are unhappy with their career choices than men. Don't know what that proves, really. I'm surprised that it's not higher than that, but there are things that we're going to talk about that come out of the Bible that might indicate why most everybody, I guess, feels like they're not getting paid enough, and in some cases that goes up really high. But and sometimes women claim that they don't get paid comparable to the work they do. Sometimes they don't take into consideration some of the obstacles to getting work done that are part of being a female versus a male, uh, and do make some difference. But it's important that we realize that just because we're successful in competing with the meanest and toughest of men in the corporate world or the political world or the law enforcement world or whatever part of the world that we're in there competing because we don't want to be at home and be a homemaker or a homekeeper. Uh, but it's the privilege of parents and to bring the next generation of people to maturity. And so God is saying to Abram, I know him in order that he may command his children and his household after him, that they keep the way of the Lord to do righteousness and justice. The Lord may bring Abraham what he has spoken to him. Because what God told Abraham he was going to do was bless Israel if they obeyed God and curse Israel if they disobeyed God. And then God went on to tell Israel that you're going to disobey and you are going to be cursed and you are going to be scattered, but someday you'll cry out to God for mercy, and I'm going to fulfill what I said I was going to give and do for Abraham. And that's what happened. It hasn't happened. That's what is happening. That's what's going on right now in the Middle East. And in Proverbs 20:11, we read in the New King James, even a child is known by his deeds, whether what he does is pure and right. Okay, so you're going to start as a young woman, let's say, and you're going to say, well, I don't think I want to be a keeper at home. I'm going to pursue a career in whatever it is, and I'm going to find my fulfillment there. I'm going to help people. I'm going to try to cure a disease, let's say. Maybe you pick out a disease that we don't have a known cure for, which is, well, I guess, a lot of them. And so you're going to go solve that problem for mankind. And at some point in your life, you'll be old enough that you're past the age of bearing children. And are you going to be able to look at your time, effort, and energies, and will you really be satisfied or not? And in Matthew 7:16, we're told you will know them by their fruits. So a woman who is a keeper at home, a wife, a mother, a homemaker, terminology that we use to describe that, uh, they have all kinds of opportunities to help a lot of people do a lot of things. And to me, satisfaction is going to be found within the parameters of how they were designed. What's in the best interest of women? To be out there fighting with the men in the corporate world, or to be a keeper at home, to be nourishing, to be loving, to be guiding, directing the next generation of people, and doing, you might say, the front line of what a father is told to do. Fathers are told to bring up their children by God. Fathers are told to bring up their children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. Fathers are told. And yet on the front line, are mothers. And so fathers are there to guide, direct, help, assist, and mothers are there to guide, direct, help, and assist. And that's gotta be the most important thing that anybody could be about doing, it would seem to me, that would be in the best interest of their own, but you might say, reward, their own value, their own pleasure, and in the best interest of the country. So, Lord willing, I'll continue this on Tuesday night, and may the Lord bless you. Goodbye.